Welcome to this course, Emotional Regulation, How Our Brains Affect Our Behaviour. In part one of this course, we're going to look at brain development and how this can affect the behaviour of young children. This training is underpinned by the latest scientific research, which mirrors the principles of other training that members of the early years team have completed. 3 of the team are Thrive trained practitioners and have also completed training in caring about adversity, resilience and empowerment, also known as CARE, and Paul Dix's Behaviour Change online course. This training, along with scientific research and our own knowledge and experience of working with children, have informed the information in this course. It's important to note that following this course, you will not be Thrive trained practitioners or have completed Paul Dix's training or CARE training. We've used the knowledge gained through doing these courses to influence this training. These are all courses which are accessible to Northumberland practitioners. You can sign up for CARE training through Learning Together, and you can find out more about Thrive and Paul Dix using the links shown on their websites. Neither of these organisations are affiliated with Northumberland, so you'd need to pay for any training you completed. In this video, we're going to cover the following. The language we'll use throughout the course, both in this video and in part 2 of the course, the live session. Brain development and the triune brain. Polyvagal theory. And the window of tolerance and its effects on stress and learning. If you take one thing away from this course, let it be this. All feelings or emotions are okay. All behaviours are not. We're going to talk about this constantly during this course. It's vital to remember that all behaviour is a form of communication. We as adults may not understand what the child is trying to communicate at the time, but they're trying to communicate something, even if that is that they don't like what is happening. The majority of us were probably raised on punitive punishments and taught to repress our feelings. This was not done out of malice from our parents or teachers. It was because this was the norm at the time, and that's how discipline worked. We're going to try and change our mindsets and take a relationships-based approach to supporting children who are struggling. This is not a quick fix to deal with a child's behaviour, but in the long run, you'll be raising a generation of more emotionally resilient and empathetic children. This can take a big mindset change from the adults, and it can be difficult to bring some people with you. But hopefully this course will equip you with the knowledge needed to convince the other adults you work with that this change is necessary and the right thing to do. There's sometimes a perception that supporting children's emotional development is soft on behaviour and allows the child to get away with things. This is not true. In the second part of this course, the live session, we'll talk about practical strategies to support children who are struggling whilst not allowing unacceptable behaviour. Changing our language can really change how we think about a child. If we talk about a child having a tantrum, we immediately associate this with something negative and something the child has chosen to do that we don't like. If we reframe this and talk about a child in distress or a child who is struggling, it changes the way we think about that child. We always need to separate the behaviour from the child, so we should never label children or call them naughty. Instead, we need to talk about what the child is struggling with. Behaviour should be thought of as something the child needs to learn, just as you would put things in place if they were struggling with reading or their fine motor skills. Regulating emotions is something children need to be taught, and some children need more support with it than others, especially if they have experienced or are experiencing trauma in their lives. We're going to move on to talking about brain development. We're going to talk about the triune brain. This splits our brain into 3 parts, and we'll consider how and when each of these develops and the effect this has on our emotional regulation system. The triune brain represents the different parts of our brain that come online sequentially as our brain is developing. Babies' brains are not fully formed at birth. The shaping of their brain's internal circuitry is dependent on the types of experiences in their early lives. We now know how important the adult-child relationship is to this essential brain development. We use all parts of our brain throughout our lives and can revert back to any part at any time if we feel threatened or our basic needs are not met. The first part of the brain we're going to talk about is the brainstem. This controls the instinctual brain, or sometimes called the reptilian brain, and is the oldest part of the human brain in evolutionary terms, around 300 million years old. This is the first part of our brain to develop when we are born and controls our physiological regulation and basic needs such as hunger, warmth, and a need for comfort. It also controls our fight, flight, or freeze response. In newborn babies, this is the only part of their brain which is online, so they only have instinctive thought related to their physiological well-being, i.e., what they need to stay alive. Babies are born with billions of brain cells, but very few connections between these brain cells. Over time, these neural connections develop when the baby is nurtured and cared for by its parents and primary carers. Stress or trauma interrupts the development of these neural connections. When our instinctual brain is engaged, we cannot separate how we feel and how we behave. Our fight, flight, or freeze response may be engaged if we are under threat, whether that be a real threat or a perceived threat, and our behaviour will be very instinctive. The limbic system controls our emotional brain and is the next part of our brain to be developed. It is around 200 to 250 million years old in evolutionary terms. It's also known as the mammalian brain and is responsible for relational regulation. It controls our emotions, memories, and habits. During the time that this part of the brain is developing, children are forming many more connections between brain cells. This allows them to begin to make simple decisions. This part of our brain typically develops between birth and the age of 5. This is important to remember, as most of the children you're working with will not have a fully developed emotional brain. The emotional brain does not allow for reasoning or abstract thought. This is developed at a later stage. The types of decisions that we make within our emotional brain are to do with simple likes and dislikes, such as which food to eat or which toy to play with. At this time, feelings and behaviour begin to separate, so children can begin to control their behaviour with the support of an adult. We may all revert back to the emotional brain at times of stress or loss, and so our ability to think rationally may be impacted. Toddlers, babies, and preschool-aged children are operating primarily from their emotional brain, so are not yet capable of reasoning or abstract thought. We often expect this of them and need to remember that it's often physically impossible for them. For example, we may say to a 2 or 3-year-old, "How would you like it if your friends hit you?" This may be impossible for them to imagine, as their brain is not yet developed enough to understand complex feelings like empathy. We'll talk more about different strategies you can use to support children who are struggling in the second part of this course, which are in line with their developmental stage. The cortex is the last part of our brain to develop and is a much more recent in evolutionary terms, only around 150,000 years old. It's also known as the human brain and is responsible for cognitive regulation. Brain connections in the development of the cortex have become much more complex, and the cognitive brain is responsible for language, abstract thought, and imagination. A well-developed cortex allows us to rationalize and reason. Our cortex is not fully developed until we're around 25 years old. This is worth remembering when we're asking children or even young adults to rationalise and reason. Especially when they are upset or stressed, they are likely not to be functioning within their underdeveloped cortex and are likely to be using the much more instinctive parts of their brain, the instinctual or emotional brain. In addition to this, if children experience or have experienced stress or trauma, their neural pathways will not be fully developed, so their cortex will be less developed than other children of their age. Once the cortex is fully developed, humans can separate feeling and thinking with the way that they behave, and they can make a choice about their own behaviour. However, as previously mentioned, during times of stress or threat, we are often not acting from within our cortex, so our behaviour and actions may be much more instinctive or emotional. Dan Siegel is a clinical psychiatrist who is one of the leading practitioners in considering the impact of brain development on our emotional state and behaviour. We're going to watch a video about the hand model of the brain and flipping the lid. This is a really easy way to explain to people the different parts of our brain and what happens when we're overwhelmed or dysregulated. You may even be able to use this with older children to help them understand what is happening in their brain when they're distressed.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child, and that's important to explain to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
Polyvagal theory describes the response that our brain and nervous system has to the environment. We receive information from the environment, both inside and outside of our bodies, which is then transferred to our nervous system. Our nervous system then decides how to respond based on the information it receives. If it perceives safety, will remain in the social engagement system, which we're going to talk about on the next slide. If it perceives danger or a threat to life, it will activate our instinctual brain and go into a fight or flight response, depending on the threat. When humans first evolved, this information would have been related to things like whether a bear was chasing us. Even though we are no longer subject to this threat, our nervous system still reacts in the same way to perceived threats. For children who live with threat on a regular basis, their fight or flight response will be easily triggered, resulting in distress behaviours that we may see, such as hitting or running away. We're going to look further at the social engagement system. Our amygdala, which is within our brainstem, is the part of our brain associated with processing emotions and memories. It is also the part of our brain which detects fear and safety. We are not consciously aware of our amygdala processing information. It's doing this all of the time in the background. Our social engagement system is active when the amygdala detects safety. We feel relaxed, calm, responsive, and ready to learn. Our cortex or cognitive brain is accessible, and we are available for relationships with others and are able to connect through eye contact, vocalization, and facial expressions. Now we're going to talk about the window of tolerance. The window of tolerance describes a place where we are comfortable, when we are in the social engagement system. When we are within our window of tolerance, we're able to handle and process our feelings in a healthy way and are able to function and thrive. During extreme stress, we can be pushed out of our window of tolerance into either hyper or hypoarousal. In adults with a fully developed cortex, where strong connections in the brain have been formed, we have a very wide window of tolerance and have strategies for staying within it. For children with an underdeveloped cortex or where neural connections have not been established because of childhood trauma, their window of tolerance is very small and they struggle to stay within it. Being pushed out of our window of tolerance activates our instinctual brain, and so we can be forced into fight, flight, or freeze mode. We stop functioning within our cortex, the part of our brain capable of rational thought, and revert back to those more primal parts of our brain responsible for our survival. When we detect danger, our body hits the accelerator, mobilizing us physically for action by increasing our heart rate and providing us with energy to fight or flee. This is what happens when we go into hyperarousal. At the opposite end, when we detect a threat to life, our body immobilizes us by hitting the brake and slowing us down, reduces our heart rate and causes us to freeze. We cannot control this. Our brain does it for us. As we get older, we can maintain the time within our window of tolerance by learning coping strategies and tolerance for other actions. But young children have not yet developed these coping strategies. They are easily pushed out of their window of tolerance and into fight, flight, or freeze mode. The threat they perceive may not actually be dangerous or a threat to life, but their body perceives it as that and subconsciously goes into hyper or hypoarousal. Children in this state cannot control their behaviour. They are acting from their instinctive brain just as a newborn baby would. Children who have experienced trauma or live with threat on a regular basis will be much more easily pushed out of their window of tolerance in order to protect themselves. They may perceive even small things as a threat to them, as they have had to protect themselves in the past, and this will manifest itself in the way that they behave. We're going to watch a video further explaining the window of tolerance from Beacon House. This is an excellent website with a wealth of resources and information.
The window of tolerance. A child's brain can be divided into 3 different areas. The first brain area to develop in the womb is the brainstem. This is the part of the brain responsible for keeping the child alive when in danger. It does this by taking the child into fight, flight, freeze, or collapse state when it perceives threat. The second area to develop from around 9 months old is called the limbic brain. This is the area of the brain that is responsible for the child's emotional maturity, their behaviour control, and their ability to have healthy relationships. The third area of the brain to develop is called the cortical brain. This is responsible for learning, language, reflection, morality, processing information and planning. The cortical brain has fully developed by the age of 25 years. To understand the behaviour of a traumatised child, it's helpful to understand that each child has a unique window of tolerance. When they are within their window of tolerance, they can think, love, learn, empathise, be playful, explore, reflect, and use words to describe their feelings. They are at their personal best. When they feel pushed out of their window of tolerance, either to the upper level, hyper-aroused, or the lower level, hypo-aroused, then their cortical thinking brain goes offline. It literally gets disconnected from the rest of their brain. They experience a neurochemical change. They swing into their brainstem and they feel distress. Each child has unique triggers which push them out of their window of tolerance. A child can be pushed just outside their window or way outside their window, leading to either mild or extreme distress. Children faced with their triggers who swing into hyperarousal go into fight, flight, freeze mode. On the inside, they feel anxious, overwhelmed, frightened, and sometimes terrified and angry. Their body changes. Their heart rate increases, they get shaky, and they might get body pains. Their body is getting ready to fight, run, or freeze. We know they are not in danger, but their brain does not know this. On the outside, they appear aggressive or anxious, or obsessive or controlling. Children faced with their triggers who swing into hypoarousal go into collapse mode. On the inside, they feel empty, dead inside, flat, shut down, disconnected, just nothing. Their body changes, their heart rate decreases, and they get ready to feign death as a survival strategy. On the outside, they appear withdrawn, quiet, hard to reach, emotionless, inactive, unproductive, and unable to learn, relate, or engage. Children who have experienced trauma and loss swing from hyper-aroused to hypo-aroused with limited amounts of time within their window of tolerance. Their window of tolerance is smaller than other children's. Our job as adults supporting the child is to help them expand their window of tolerance, as this is where they can learn, love, and be loved. We can do this by teaching them how to notice, communicate, and manage their emotions, and how to bring themselves back into the personal window of tolerance. By regulating their feelings for them and with them, we show them that their emotions are not dangerous and can be tolerated. We can also help by identifying their triggers and creating an environment that feels as safe as possible for them. We must work hard to stay within our own window of tolerance in order for us to help children stay within theirs. Adults, stay hopeful and calm. A child's stress response can be reduced with the right support in the right place at the right time.
Children who are under threat or stress, whether this be real or perceived, and are pushed out of their window of tolerance, may revert to the behaviours seen on this slide. They cannot engage their cortex and operate within the social engagement system. These are just some behaviours that children may display. There are others too. When we are triggered into these responses, it is not our choice and makes learning very difficult. Let's imagine a scenario. You're at the supermarket with your young children. One of them is screaming because they want you to buy them a bottle of special Christmas encrusted gin. You said no. The other is moaning because they're hungry. You manage to get everything you need in the trolley. You drag them to the checkout, you wait in the queue, you finally get to the front. The cashier scans all of your shopping, you go to pay, and you've forgotten your purse. Everyone in the queue is staring at you. There's a big queue behind you, and they're starting to tut and mutter under their breath. How does this scenario make you feel? What would you do in this situation? What might your reaction be? You may well be pushed out of your window of tolerance and lose your temper with someone. Possibly your child who is hungry and has now taken matters into their own hands and opened the biscuits from the shopping which you now can't pay for. Even though, when calm, you can rationally see that this is not your child's fault, you still lose your temper as you have flipped your lid. You are not thinking within your cortex and have reverted to your emotional brain. For children whose cortex is not yet fully developed, this can happen over seemingly trivial things, such as being given the wrong colour cup or not being allowed to go outside when they want to. In order for a child to learn, they need to be within their social engagement system and within their window of tolerance. If they're pushed out of this, they are not able to learn effectively. Just as in the supermarket scenario, in that situation, you may not have been able to think rationally. You would likely have lost your temper with someone, a fight response, or dropped everything and run away, a flight response. If we are in a fight, flight, or freeze response, learning is difficult. Our brain and body is in a defensive state. We find it harder to attune to the human voice. We are less able to read and take in social signals from others. Our thinking is chaotic or confused, and we experience intense feelings of distress. Bruce Perry is a psychiatrist, clinician, and researcher in children's mental health and neuroscience. Perry's work has influenced a lot of what we now know about how trauma and stress affect the brain development and behaviour of children. Perry suggests we should always be asking, what happened to you, rather than, why are you behaving like that? The next part of this course is a live session where we're going to talk about some strategies you can use to support children's emotional resilience and hopefully lead to less distress over time. Thank you for watching. We look forward to seeing you at the live part of this training, where we'll discuss how to support distressed children and begin to consider the ethos within your setting related to building relationships. If you have any questions about this video or the live training session, please do not hesitate to contact Joss Jill or Claire on the email addresses shown. We'll see you at the live training session.